We are witnessing a major turning point in the history of humanity, Michael Snyder reports. This is the moment when humanity will choose between peace and global war. And sadly, it appears that our window of opportunity to choose peace is rapidly closing. Negotiations with Iran have not made much progress, and the Trump administration is warning that it's ready to walk away from negotiations to end the war in Ukraine if the Russians and the Ukrainians do not agree to the 7-point deal that was now being proposed. We really have reached one of the most critical turning points in human history, but the most people living in the Western world do not seem to understand the importance of the drama that's playing out right in front of our eyes. On Wednesday, Vice President J.D. Vance said something that should chill all of us to the core. We've issued a very explicit proposal to both the Russians and the Ukrainians, and it's time for them to either say yes or for the United States to walk away from this process, Vance told reporters in India, where he is on a 4-day visit. Vance spoke as envoys from Washington, Kiev, and European nations gathered for talks in the UK amid a new U.S. push to end Russia's war in Ukraine. It's now time, I think, to take, if not the final step, one of the final steps, which is at a broad level, a party saying that we're going to stop the loss there, and we're going to freeze the territorial lines at some level close to where they are today, Vance said. And now, of course, that means the Ukrainians and the Russians are both going to have to give up some of the territory they currently own. And thus, this ultimatum is very similar to the ultimatum that was issued by the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio last week. It's obvious that the Trump administration is quickly losing patience with the Russians and the Ukrainians, but U.S. officials are willing to take one last shot at a peace agreement. According to Axios, the following are 5 things that Russia would get from President Trump's 7-point peace plan. 1. De jure U.S. recognition of Russian control in Crimea. De facto recognition of the Russians' occupation of nearly all of the Lugansk Oblast and the occupied portions of Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. A promise that Ukraine will not become a member of NATO. The text notes that Ukraine could become part of the European Union. 4. The lifting of sanctions imposed since 2014. 5. Enhanced economic cooperation with the U.S., particularly in the energy and industrial sectors. And the following are 4 things that Ukraine would get from President Trump's 7-point peace plan. 1. A robust security guarantee involving an ad hoc group of European countries and potentially also like-minded non-European countries. The document is vague in terms of how this peacekeeping operation would function and does not mention any U.S. participation. 2. The return of a small part of Kharkov Oblast Russia has occupied. 3. The unimpeded passage of the Dnieper River, which runs along the front line in parts of southern Ukraine. 4. Compensation and assistance for rebuilding, though the document does not say where the funding will come from. The plan that the Trump administration is proposing is reasonable. I would highly encourage both sides to agree to the deal. Sadly, it appears that the Ukrainians are already rejecting it. Ukraine will not legally recognize Russia's occupation of Crimea under any circumstances, President Zelensky said during a briefing in Kiev on April 22nd. There is nothing to talk about. This violates our constitution. This is our territory, the territory of the people of Ukraine, Zelensky said. This statement comes amid reports that the recognition of Crimea as Russian territory is being considered as part of the U.S.-backed proposal to end the war in Ukraine. What in the world is he thinking? Ukraine is losing the war. If the war continues, Ukraine will steadily lose even more territory. I can definitely understand why President Trump is fed up with this guy. After learning of the comments, this is what President Trump posted on his Truth Social account. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is boasting on the front page of the Wall Street Journal that Ukraine will not legally recognize the occupation of Crimea. There's nothing to talk about here. This statement is very harmful to the peace negotiations with Russia in that Crimea was lost years ago under the auspices of President Barack Hussein Obama, and is not even a point of discussion. Nobody is asking Zelensky to recognize Crimea as Russian territory, but if he wants Crimea, why didn't they fight for it 11 years ago when it was handed over to Russia without a shot being fired? The area also houses, for many years before the Obama handover, major Russian submarine bases. It's inflammatory statements like Zelensky's that make it so difficult to settle this war. He has nothing to boast about. The situation for Ukraine is dire. He can have peace, or he can fight for another 3 years before losing the whole country. I have nothing to do with Russia, but I have much to do with I'm wanting to save on average 5,000 Russians and Ukrainian soldiers a week who are being lost for no reason whatsoever. The statement made by Zelensky today will do nothing but prolong all this, and nobody wants that. We are very close to a deal, but the man with no cards to play should know, finally, get it done. I look forward to being able to help Ukraine and Russia get out of this complete and total mess that would have never started if I were president, Trump said. The Ukrainians clearly do not want to end the war. Of course, the Russians do not exactly seem eager to accept that Trump is proposing either, but spokesperson Dmitry Peskov on Tuesday said Russia was not aware of the plan's terms, responding to a report by The Post about early details of a proposed agreement. The issue of the Ukrainian settlement is extremely complex, of course, so it's hardly possible to set some hard deadlines and try to rush a resolution to the conflict into a shortened time frame. He told Russian outlet VGTRK this would be an exercise in futility. If the Trump administration decides to walk away from negotiations, any chance at peace with Russia is probably dead. So what would happen then? We would just let the Russians take as much of Ukraine as they want, or would we escalate matters? Of course, if both sides choose to escalate matters, we know what will eventually happen. Meanwhile, the Russians have just entered into a strategic partnership with Iran. Russian President Putin has signed a law ratifying a strategic partnership treaty with Iran. Russian state news agency RIA reported on Monday. The agreement is expected to strengthen military and diplomatic ties between Moscow and Tehran. As part of the agreement, the two countries agreed not to provide military assistance to any third party with which the other is not in hot conflict, according to the Kiev Independent. That is a very troubling development because the U.S. could be at a war with Iran very soon. President Trump has repeatedly warned that if Iran does not make a deal, there will be military action against Iran's nuclear facilities. On Wednesday, Marco Rubio said the Iranians would be allowed to have a civilian nuclear program, but they will not be allowed to continue to enrich uranium under any circumstances. The U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said Wednesday that U.S. President Donald Trump is determined to prevent Iran from attaining a nuclear weapon and would prefer to do that by negotiations as opposed to military means. However, he said the U.S. would be willing to see Tehran have a civilian nuclear program as long as they were not enriching uranium. We do not want a war, Rubio told Barry Weiss on her Honestly podcast. We do not want to see a war. This is not a president that can campaign on starting wars. And as he said very clearly, Iran is not going to have a nuclear weapon, and he reserves every right to prevent that from happening, but he would prefer it not to happen. He would prefer that there not be a need to resort to military force, either by us or anybody else. He would prefer that it would be something that we can negotiate. The Iranians should take the deal that is being offered to them, but the Iranians have already clearly stated that enriching uranium is a red line for them. There's no way that they are going to stop doing it, and so that means that war is coming. And once the attack on Iran's underground facilities start, the Iranians will respond with tremendous force, and the Middle East will erupt in flames. The Iranians have some surprise up their sleeves, but so do the Israelis. If cooler heads do not prevail, we're going to see tremendous death and destruction in the Middle East. And if we can't find a way to achieve peace with the Russians, it's just a matter of time before the worst-case scenario unfolds. This is our last chance, our best chance at peace, and we must not blow it. This is by Michael Snyder on End of the American Dream. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support. About the author, Michael Snyder's new book, a blockbuster entitled Why, is available in paperback and for Kindle on Amazon. He also has written 8 other books available on Amazon, including Chaos, End Times, 7-Year Apocalypse, Lost Prophecies of Future America, the Beginning of the End, Living a Life That Really Matters. When you purchase any of Michael's books, you help to support the work he's doing. And you can also get his articles by email as soon as he publishes them by subscribing to his Substack newsletter. Michael has published thousands of articles on the Economic Collapse blog, End of the American Dream, and the Most Important News. And he always freely and happily allows others to publish those articles on their own websites. These are such troubled times and people need hope. John 3:16 tells us about the hope that God has given us through Jesus Christ. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life. If you have not already done so, we strongly urge you to invite Jesus Christ to be your Lord and Savior today. Please support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.